Welcome everybody to today's webinar. Today we are finding fresh fats, specifically olive oil. So we're going to be talking about the health benefits of olive oil and how to shop for olive oil. So we have 4 speakers on the call today. Myself, Paige Passwaters.
This is Maddie McDonough.
I'm Victoria Cochon.
And I'm Kelsey Bednars.
Perfect. So let's get started. So today's learning objectives, we want you to be able to understand and differentiate between the different types of fat in our diet. We are also going to be discussing the health benefits of using olive oil as a healthy fat in our diet and utilizing all of its protective benefits. We would love for you to understand the differences between the types of olive oils that are out there. We hope you can gain an understanding of how to shop for olive oil and how to properly store it so that its shelf life can be maximized and it can stay in good quality. And we're going to equip you with ways to use olive oil rather than using other fats that are out there in our diet that aren't as healthy as olive oil. So just to get started, we're going to just share some fun facts about olive oil. So it actually takes quite a bit of olives in order to make extra virgin olive oil, which is the purest form of olive oil. So to make just 1 quart of extra virgin olive oil, it requires 11 pounds of olives that need to be pressed. And on average, the world consumes approximately 2.25 million tons of olive oil each year. Overall, the United States is not the most prominent producer of olive oil, but of all the olive oil that is produced in the United States, California is responsible for producing almost 99% of it. So it is the primary producer in the US.
Okay, so now that we have a little bit of background on olive oil, we wanted to give you guys a basic introduction to fats so you have a pretty strong understanding of where olive oil kind of fits into that mix and how it's categorized. So we're going to break it down and start from the very beginning. Fats are an essential part of our diet, and we're going to group them into 3 categories to further explain them. So we're going to talk about saturated fats, the unsaturated fats, which can be further divided into 2 subcategories, which we'll go into further detail, and then finally trans fats. So actually all foods have a mixture of these different fats. Very rarely is there just one type of fat in a food. And even foods like nuts contain some saturated fat, which typically is labeled as an unhealthy fat. So let's get into the different fats. First, we're going to start with the saturated fat. So this is the fat that kind of gets a bad rap and is typically deemed unhealthy. So a pretty good rule of thumb with the saturated fats is to remember that if it's solid at room temperature, that's a pretty good bet that it's a saturated fat. So think of your butters or lards, meats. If it's solid at room temperature, there's a good chance that it is in fact saturated. So like we mentioned, the meats and butters are some examples, but generally animal products are the typical source of saturated fats. So just your whole fat dairy products. It does tend to slip into some grain-based desserts as well. So why is that important? If we are consuming in excess of saturated fat in our diet, our LDL cholesterol, which is the unhealthy cholesterol, will increase. And when we have high levels of LDL cholesterol, that puts us at risk for heart disease, stroke, and other cardiovascular events. So moving on to trans fats. Trans fats are definitely the worst kind of fat. They're actually created in an industrial process, which involves adding hydrogen to a liquid oil in order to make them more solid. So that's why they are often referred to as partially hydrogenated oils. So it's important to remember that when you're avoiding trans fats, you also want to keep out an eye for labels that say things like includes partially hydrogenated oil. The reason that trans fats are still around is that they're very inexpensive and they are highly shelf stable. So you typically see the trans fats in the food service industry, especially when there's deep frying present, because these oils are inexpensive and have such a high smoke point. You can reuse them again for fried foods. So trans fats are typically with the fried foods, the baked goods, the processed snacks. But interestingly enough, the trans fats are now being phased out of the US food system as of June 2018. They've been banned. So by summer 2020, they should be totally out of our food system. And the reason being is there is such a wide link between the consumption of trans fats and heart disease. So we have seen time and time again that consumption of trans fat leads to a raise in LDL cholesterol, and it even can lower our HDL cholesterol and affect other things such as insulin resistance. So the FDA was actually quoted as saying that once trans fats are totally removed from our system, we will be able to prevent thousands of deaths and heart attacks each year. Moving on to the unsaturated fat. So these are considered to be the healthy fats, like olive oil, which is the main topic of our presentation. And the unsaturated fats are typically liquid at room temperature. So unlike the saturated fats, which we find are solid at room temperature. And again, unlike the saturated fats, the unsaturated fats are typically found in plant sources. So these are your vegetable oils, your nuts, your seeds, olives, and even some fish. And so why is this important? It's important because if we begin to make these swaps for unsaturated fats, we're putting those in place of the saturated fats. They can actually be extremely beneficial for improving our overall health by reducing our bad cholesterol, reducing our overall inflammation, and managing a healthy level of our HDL cholesterol. So as I mentioned, when we first started to talk about fats, there are two different types of unsaturated fat, and that is the monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. So throughout the remainder of this presentation, we'll refer to those as MUFAs and PUFAs. So MUFA, monounsaturated fat, again, is liquid at room temperature, and it can support improved cholesterol levels. So lowering that LDL and increasing that HDL for an ideal ratio. And again, these come in plant-based sources, namely olive oil, but also things like avocados, pecans, hazelnuts, and pumpkin seeds. And then our polyunsaturated fats, or PUFAs, are especially important to consume because we really get these mostly from food sources. Those are omega-3s, and similar to the MUFAs, they support healthy cholesterol levels. So thinking about increasing the HDL, lowering the LDL. And some sources of PUFAs are fish or flax seeds and even walnuts.
Perfect. So now that Maddie has kind of explained the variety of fats that are out there in our diet, we know what MUFAs are, and we know that olive oil is particularly high in these beneficial MUFAs. So olive oil plays a role in the prevention of heart disease, whereas these other types of fat actually contribute to heart disease. So just a huge reason to always choose olive oil as your preferred source of dietary fat. Olive oil can also be protective against certain types of cancers due to these MUFAs as well. And olive oil is high in polyphenols and antioxidants such as vitamin E, and these are also very protective. The American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that consuming these MUFAs, especially from olive oil, can lower the overall risk of heart disease. And especially, as Maddie said, if you're replacing these saturated fats and refined carbs with monounsaturated fats. And then in addition, in 2015, the Journal of Alzheimer's and Dementia examined over 900 people from ages 58 to 98. They all filled out food questionnaires and underwent neurological testing. And it was concluded that those whose diets most closely followed the MIND diet, which places a large emphasis on olive oil, as well as the Mediterranean diet, which you may have heard of, which also emphasizes olive oil and other healthy fats. These people had a cognitive function equal to that of a person more than 7 years younger, which is very profound.
Okay, now that we talked about the different kind of fats and the health benefits of olive oil, we created this quick little shopping guide to explain the different kind of olive oils and some other things that are helpful for you. So one of the first kind of the main or the best kind of olive oil is extra virgin olive oil. And this is the purest kind of olive oil on the market. So it's one of the higher ones because it's got strong flavor and smell. It's very potent in the smell. And it's also, if you look at it, you see that it's a dark green color. It's the least amount of process because it's not refined and it's just cold pressed. So the olive plant is just pressed without any other processing. And then the extra virgin olive oil is also really high in vitamin E, which is an antioxidant, and it has a free acidity of 0.008%, which is the least from all the other olive oils. After that, the next option would be the virgin olive oil, which is a little bit less flavorful and has a slightly less strong smell. And it's also a little bit lighter in color, so it's not as dark green as the extra virgin olive oil. And similarly to the extra virgin olive oil, it's cold pressed and it's rich in antioxidants, but its free acidity is a little bit higher. Instead of the 0.008 from the extra virgin olive oil, this is 0.02%. And then the last kind of olive oil is the regular olive oil, which is very little flavor and smell to it, and it's either clear or very faded green color, depending on the brand or any kind of other differences in the olive oil. Also, the regular olive oil doesn't have many antioxidants. It could have either a low amount of antioxidants or no antioxidants at all. And it's usually a combination of refined olive oil and virgin olive oil. And then this one has the highest amount of free acidity at 0.033%. So there's many different kinds of olive oils. It's not just these three, but these are the basic categories that we're going to be covering for this sake. So now that we know the different kinds of olive oils, we could look into how to buy the different kind of olive oils. So not all of the olive oil is the same. We have some that are different brands from different countries. Like I mentioned, different kind of extra virgin, regular, or virgin olive oil. And the USDA sees the extra virgin olive oil as the highest, the one with the highest standard of all olive oils. It's got the best flavor, the best odor, and the best fatty acid content. And then buying extra virgin olive oil would be preferred, but any olive oil or any of the MUFAs, the ones that are liquid at room temperature, would be much better than the saturated fats, which are solid at room temperature. So some tips to look for when shopping for them is to look for containers that are dark colored. And then also you want to make sure to look at the harvest by or sell by date to make sure that the oil you're getting is the freshest one and won't be expiring soon. and that it was the one that's been produced the closest to today's date. And then also you want to look for small bottles that you will use up faster and won't be just sitting in your counter or inside a drawer for a long period of time. And then you also want to choose the bottles that are in towards the back of the shelves where they're not as likely to get exposed to light.
So as Victoria mentioned, extra virgin olive oil is the highest quality, and that's what you want to shoot for when you're out there shopping. So as a part of our handout, which you can see, we've included the top 5 brands to make it easy for you when you're out at the market. That includes the brands California Olive Ranch, Cola Vita, Lucchini, Premium Select, and Trader Joe's has 2 that made the list as well. So these 5 brands we put on our list based on the testing from the International Olive Council that was done in 2015. So the IOC went out and randomly selected 11 brands, and out of those 11 brands, only these 5 passed as being genuinely true extra virgin olive oil. So unfortunately, a lot of the extra virgin olive oils that are out there in the stores may not be pure EVOO. So in July 2010, the UC Davis Olive Center issued a report showing that 69% of imported olive oils labeled as EVOO actually failed, which is very unfortunate and makes it very hard to navigate when you're out there shopping. But I just encourage you to do some research if you have a favorite brand and you want to look into it. If not, these 5 brands are a good starting point. Because there are no strict guidelines for olive oil in the US, although the USDA does have a program called the Quality Monitoring Program that actually included olive oil in 2012. But between 2012 and 2016, only 2 olive oil brands participated in this program. So it's not widely being used or well known at this point. And hopefully soon regulation gets a little more strict with olive oil so that way we can trust the brands that are out on the market.
Okay, so now that we talked about the different kind of olive oils and how to buy it, we'll look at why it's important to store them properly. So once you take them home, you want to make sure that you store them properly so that they don't go rancid and so they don't lose their flavor. This usually causes the olive oil to get a foul smell. It loses a lot of its flavor and even some of the health benefits of olive oil. So you want to make sure that you're storing the olive oil the correct way. So some of the things to avoid is light, heat, and oxygen. The light usually destroys the antioxidants in the olive oil. The heat changes the flavor and the smell. And then the oxygen oxidizes the oil. So those are 3 things we want to avoid. And then how do we avoid those? We want to try to store them away from heat, light, and air. So most people have a tendency to keep their olive oil on the counter next to their stovetop so that they have it readily available while they're cooking, but that's actually not recommended. And we try to keep it inside a cool place to avoid that heat. And then also we want to keep it away from light. So like we mentioned in the buying, you should go for a dark colored glass bottle for the olive oil versus something clear or light colored so that the light has less chance of hitting the olive oil. Also, we want to try to keep the olive oil in a cabinet somewhere where the light won't be able to reach it as well. And then also we want to try to keep the olive oil limited from oxygen. So usually after you open it, we recommend using it within the first 1 to 2 months. And then also, if you have olive oil that you're not going to be using right away, it's best not to open it until you're ready to use it.
So the beauty of olive oil is that it has a fairly mild taste and is very versatile to use. So we want to equip you with some ways to use olive oil and ways that you can switch them out for the other fats in your diet. One way to use olive oil is to grease your cooking pans with it instead of melted butter, or even using olive oil instead of another type of oil that may not have as many health benefits as olive oil has. You can use olive oil as a salad dressing, either by itself if the salad has enough flavor already, or you can mix it with a balsamic vinegar or other ingredients to make your own healthy homemade salad dressing. You can also saute vegetables or meats in olive oil as a way of incorporating it into your diet, as opposed to boiling or frying your meats and vegetables, which can leach the nutrients out of your vegetables and add unhealthy fats. However, it is important to note that you cannot deep fry with olive oil. This is because the olive oil can't withstand high heat, and it will break down the oil and it'll begin smoking. So remember when we talked about how to store olive oil and that continuous heat exposure will eventually cause color and odor change? This will also happen if it's used at too high of a heat. So this also applies to sauteing, and be sure to keep the heat at a low to medium setting when sauteing and don't let it get too hot. So olive oil can be easily switched out in place of another saturated or unhealthy fat in your diet. It's not necessarily cutting out fat, but rather just substituting the healthier olive oil for the less healthy fats when you're cooking in ways that you already use fats. Some ways to do this would be greasing a pan like we had mentioned before instead of using butter. You can actually buy olive oil spritzers at a grocery store that you can spray like Pam, but you can fill it with your own oil. So you can choose the extra virgin olive oils and fill it with that, and you can spritz your pans with that. Olive oil is also delicious to dip bread in, especially with Italian herbs, instead of buttering your bread. So serving it with an herb olive oil and dipping your bread instead of buttering to guests. And as I mentioned in the last slide, you can saute vegetables and meat in olive oil instead of butter or lard. Many creamy salad dressings are high in the saturated fats, the unhealthy ones. So switching to an olive oil-based dressing is a great way to substitute that healthy fat for the unhealthy ones. Something that may be a surprise to a lot of people is that olive oil can be used in many brownie, cake, and bread recipes instead of butter. Just be sure to do a quick Google search first to determine the substitution ratio, because a little less oil is typically required compared to the amount of butter that a recipe calls for. So when you're making that switch, you want to make sure it's the correct ratio. But a lot of times you can't even tell a difference when you're substituting olive oil for the butter that it calls for. Olive oil can also be used as a base for marinades, which gives a nice savory flavor to food, especially grilled foods. And you can also drizzle it over pasta or vegetables to add some flavor, like for a light summertime pasta salad type thing. And lastly, you can substitute olive oil for butter when you're making mashed potatoes. So there's a lot of delicious ways to use olive oil instead of other fats. All it takes is a quick search of the internet, and you can find countless ways to use olive oil and recipes for it to guide you through that. So there's 4 main takeaway points that we'd like you to remember from today's message. The first one is to choose liquid oils instead of solid fats whenever possible. This means that you're choosing the healthier unsaturated fats over the less healthy saturated fats. The second point, try and incorporate olive oil into your cooking and baking. If you're already using fat for these things, then it's easy to make a switch and use the healthier olive oil. The third point, if possible, choose extra virgin olive oils over the virgin or regular olive oils. This will give you the best benefits because of the powerful polyphenols and antioxidants in the extra virgin olive oil that can help reduce your risk of coronary artery disease. And then the fourth point, if extra virgin olive oil is not possible and you can't find a true one, it's important to know that any oil that takes the place of a solid fat is still great. So now we want to challenge you to make the fresh fat switch. Can you think of one way that you can swap olive oil for a solid fat this week? Try making one swap a week and sticking to it, and your heart will thank you. If you want to look more into this, we've listed the research articles that we've used for our presentation, and you can find them here. As well as if you have any questions for any of us presenters today, we listed our names and emails for you to contact us. We've enjoyed having you, and we hope you've enjoyed listening tonight, and we hope you learned something.